Greetings to everyone. Welcome back to my educational channel on biology. I'm teacher Janet, and in this video we're going to discuss 1.2, chapter 1.2 or subtopic 1.2 from the Form 5 Biology KSSM syllabus. Okay, the title is Meristematic Tissues and Growth, and this is the second video on this topic. Okay, in the first video we've already discussed the meristematic tissues. So now we're going to discuss types of plant growth. There are two types, namely primary growth and secondary growth. Now, some of you have asked me whether I'm going to continue to do long content videos like this one. Definitely yes, it's all in the plan. Okay, so this year I will try to do more Form 5 videos, but I also will continue to do some Form 4 videos where needed. Okay, especially the ones that still have to be completed. All right. Okay, so for primary growth is sometimes just called vertical growth. Okay, but the definition is primary growth is the increase in the height of the plant and the length of the roots, or the elongation of the stem and the roots. Okay, so it is sort of like a vertical growth. Whereas secondary growth occurs later after primary growth, and it is the increase in the diameter or circumference of the stem and the roots. Okay, like this stem is grown very thick and fat, right? It's because of secondary growth. So it's a form of lateral growth. Okay, this is just a common term for it. Okay, but we must say it's an increase in the diameter or circumference of the stem and root. That's secondary growth. Let's find out more. So the learning standards for this topic are as follows. Okay, meristematic tissues and growth. We should be able to describe the types of growth. Two types of growth, primary growth and secondary growth. Next, justify the necessity of primary growth and secondary growth. Then compare and contrast primary growth and secondary growth in eudicotyledon plants. And finally, assess the economic importance of plants that have undergone secondary growth. Okay, how do they contribute to the economy of the country? Now, overview. So we have already discussed meristematic tissues. There are two types of meristematic tissues. The apical meristem is made up of the shoot apical meristem and root apical meristem. Lateral meristem is made up of the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. We've already discussed the three zones of cell growth for in the apical meristems. All right. Now we're going to go on to the two types of plant growth, which are primary growth and secondary growth. Okay, so we'll be focusing on this too. So there are two types of growth that occur in plants, namely primary growth and secondary growth. Primary growth is carried out by the apical meristems at the shoot tip and the root tip. Right, shoot tip and root tip. So the shoot tip has the apical meristem called the shoot apical meristem, and at the roots we have the root apical meristem. So they are both responsible for the elongation of the plant. Okay, elongation of the stem and the root, and there is loosely called primary growth is loosely called vertical growth. Okay, so at the shoot tips and the side buds we have the apical meristems, and also at the root tips here. Then you can see the increase in height of the plant as the primary growth occurs. Okay, now for secondary growth, is carried out by the lateral meristems in the stem and root to increase the diameter or the circumference of the stem and root. That means to make the stem and root thicker, and is sometimes called lateral growth, right, within inverted brackets or inverted commas. And here the tree will grow laterally or sideways due to the activity of the lateral meristems, which are the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. So first let's discuss primary growth, which is the elongation of the stem and the roots, right? And sometimes loosely we call it vertical growth because the plant grows vertically up and the roots will grow downwards, right? So this is the cross section of a stem of a plant that has undergone just primary growth. Okay, you have the epidermis, cortex, primary phylum is formed in primary growth, vascular cambium, and primary xylem, and then pith. The pith is here. Okay, So if you look at this picture, this is the a slide showing you all the different tissues more clearly. So this outer layer is the epidermis. Then we have maybe some collenchymal cells here to strengthen the stem, give support to the stem. And then these are sclerenchymal tissues, okay, that form like a cap around each vascular bundle. So these are all the vascular bundles here. And then we have the phloem somewhere here, all right, primary phloem that transports organic food substances, okay, from leaves to other parts of the plant. And then there's a layer of cambium here, which is not clear, between the phloem and the xylem. So this is the primary xylem. We know this is primary. This is the xylem tissues because you can see the xylem vessels, which are like empty cells without cytoplasm, with a big lumen to transport water. Okay, so all these are xylem vessels. They help to transport water from roots to other parts of the plant. And then in the center here, we have the pith. Okay, so let's find out more about primary growth. So let's talk about primary growth first. Primary growth is defined as the growth that occurs after germination of a seed. And it occurs in all plants. All plants have to start growing and they carry out primary growth so that they will become taller and taller, right? So this primary growth is caused by cell division or mitosis at the shoot tips and root tips, as we have discussed in the previous video. The function is to elongate the plant stems here and the roots also. Okay, so when it elongates the plant stems, then the plant can grow higher and higher, taller and taller, to obtain more sunlight for photosynthesis, and so that they won't be covered up by the other plants. Now, location. Primary growth occurs in the apical meristems at the shoot tips and root tips, okay, to cause the plant to elongate. The process. Primary growth starts when the meristematic tissues or meristem cells in the apical meristems, in the zone of cell division, divide actively by mitosis, right, at the shoot tips and the root tips. After that, elongation and differentiation of cells occur. So when the cells elongate, it also helps to elongate the stem and the roots, right? And when differentiation occurs, it means that the matured cells will carry out changes in shape and structure so that they can carry out their specific functions more efficiently. Okay, so differentiation of cells will cause the production of primary xylem and phloem during primary growth. Now, at the shoot tips, the leaf primordia and the shoot primordia will grow. So leaf primordia or leaf primordium are the young cells that will develop into a new leaf. A group of young cells or a group of cells that will develop into a new leaf, right? And that's the meaning of the word primordia or primordium. So the leaf primordia and shoot primordia grow to form new leaves and shoots. And this enables the plants to increase in height at the shoot tips. So shoot apical meristem cells will divide, and then there'll be differentiation of the cells, and then the leaf primordia and shoot primordia will form the new leaves and shoots. Now at the root tips, the root cap will become exhausted as the root is growing downwards, okay, and as the root cap penetrates the soil. So what's the function of the root cap? The root cap helps to protect the meristematic tissues behind it from injury, okay? So when the root cap becomes exhausted, the cells of the root cap has to be replaced by the meristematic cells here behind it. Now what happens if the root cap is worn out and after that the root apical meristem is injured and damaged? If that occurs, then if this part is injured, it cannot carry out the function of mitosis, then the root will not be able to grow downwards or lengthen anymore. What's the necessity of primary growth? Firstly is to increase the plant height, and this allows maximum elongation of plants. Okay, primary growth allows maximum elongation of plants to absorb more sunlight for photosynthesis. right? So that it can grow higher and higher and taller. And if it's competing with other plants to obtain sunlight, it needs to grow taller than them to absorb more sunlight for photosynthesis. So primary growth is very important to increase the plant height. Now, apart from that, primary growth also helps to increase transportation of substances through the production of primary phloem, which transports products of photosynthesis from leaves where it's produced to other plant parts like the roots. And then it also helps to form primary xylem. Okay, primary growth helps to form the primary xylem, which transports water and mineral salts from the soil through the roots to the leaves. Now, lastly, primary growth helps to increase support because the primary xylem that's formed contains the hard and strong lignin in the cell walls. So the primary xylem has lignified cell walls that are very strong, and this helps to provide some support to the herbaceous or non-woody plants and also to young plants. So we finished discussing primary growth. Let's go on to the second type of growth, which is secondary growth, right? So this picture shows a plant that has just undergone primary growth, and this is the cross-section of its stem. Then as secondary growth occurs, the lateral meristems in the stem and root will start to divide by mitosis. So these lateral meristems are the vascular cambium and the cork cambium, right? And then they will produce the secondary tissues. Vascular cambium will produce secondary phloem and secondary xylem. Cork cambium will produce cork and secondary cortex on the white part here. So let's find out more. And basically the secondary growth involves the increase in the diameter or the circumference of the stem and roots, okay, to give more support to the plant that's growing taller and taller. So now let's discuss secondary growth, okay? So let's find out what plants carry out secondary growth. Now, so flowering plants or angiosperms can be basically divided into two groups of plants, monocotyledons and eudicotyledons. What's the difference? So monocotyledons have leaves with parallel veins, whereas the eudicotyledons have leaves with a network-like veins or with a network of veins, okay, like a fisherman's net. That's the pattern of the veins on the leaves of eudicotyledons. And also from the name, okay, we know that monocotyledons have one cotyledon, which is a food store, in each of its seeds. But eudicotyledons have two cotyledons in each of their seeds, right? Okay, now let's look at the different types of monocotyledons and also eudicotyledons based on whether they carry out primary growth or not, right? Now we start with the eudicotyledons. So there are two types of eudicotyledons. The first type is the herbaceous eudicots or herbaceous plants. The word herbaceous means that it has a non-woody stem. That means the stem is not hard but soft, flexible, and it is flexible and also green. It has a green soft stem that's flexible. So these herbaceous eudicots only carry out primary growth and they do not carry out secondary growth to produce wood, okay, to produce lots of wood. So no secondary growth. So they produce soft, flexible green stems with no woody tissues. Examples of these herbaceous eudicots are some plants that produce vegetables, right? Like the pea plant, which is a climber, then cabbage and spinach as shown here. It has a soft green flexible stem, and strawberry, which is also herbaceous. Herbaceous means non-woody, right? Now, on the other hand, there's another group of eudicots which are woody, like the woody trees, okay, as shown here. So they have woody stems, and they actually undergo two types of growth, the primary growth and the secondary growth. Secondary growth means the increase in diameter or circumference or thickness of the stem and root, okay? So the stem will become thickened, and then also it will be quite hard, okay? It's no longer soft, green, and flexible. So Woody eudicots or woody trees produce hard woody stem. Examples are the durian tree and other fruit trees like mango tree and also the rambutan tree. Okay, then you have jati tree, which produces thick, and then shrubs. Shrubs are smaller or shorter than the trees, right? And they have a lot of stems arising from above the ground, from the ground. Now let's go on to the monocotyledons. So again, we have two types of monocotyledons: the herbaceous monocots and those monocots with thickened stems. Okay, that look like this. It looks a bit like wood, right? So the herbaceous monocots, like the herbaceous eudicots, they only undergo primary growth. There's no secondary growth. They have soft, flexible green stems and no woody tissues. Examples are grasses, paddy, and wheat. All these have the parallel vein leaves. Okay, whereas herbaceous eudicots, they have the veins that have a pattern of like a network-like veins. Now, next there are some monocots which have thickened stems. A small number of them have thickened stems, and actually they have undergone both primary and secondary growth. Okay, although their secondary growth may be a bit different from that of the woody eudicots. Okay, now we have to know the names of these three plants, which are monocots that undergo secondary growth. So they are Dracaena species, aloe species like aloe vera, and agave species. Okay, so this is aloe vera, and below here we have a thickened stem. All right, for the aloe vera plant that is older. Now, if this plant is Dracaena, it has the stem that looks like a bit like wood, like a strong, hard, woody stem. So we're going to focus on the woody eudicots. Okay, so what is secondary growth? Secondary growth is defined as the growth that occurs after primary growth has stopped for a specific part of the stem or root. It does not occur in all plants. It occurs mainly in the eudicots, especially that means the woody trees, all right, and a few monocots, which we'll discuss later. So it's caused by cell division or mitosis of lateral meristem cells in the stem and root. So again, growth is always caused by cell division or mitosis of meristematic tissues. In this case, it's caused by the lateral meristem in the stem and root. Okay, so let's find out more about the lateral meristem. Now, the function is to increase the circumference or diameter of the plant stem and root. As shown here for this tree, which is an apple tree, the stem or root will thicken, right, when secondary growth occurs. This is to provide more support and stability for the growing tree. If not, the stem may break, right, if it cannot support the leaves. Now, location. Where does secondary growth occur? It occurs in the lateral meristems in the stem and root. Okay, inside the stem and also the root is underground. Now, lateral meristems consist of vascular cambium and cork cambium. So when you talk about lateral meristems, remember it consists of the cambiums. Okay, the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. For apical meristems, you just have the shoot apical meristem and the root apical meristem. Okay. Now, when does secondary growth begin in a stem? In a woody plant, secondary growth may begin around the end of the first year or second year inside the stem, and it continues on for many more years. Okay, it can also occur in the roots to develop secondary tissues like wood and bark. Let's find out more about this. Okay, the location of the lateral meristems. All right, so if you cut through the stem of a tree, you will find that there are two rings inside the tree, two tissues that form rings. The first one is the cork cambium, which is the outer ring, and the second one is the vascular cambium, okay, which is the inner ring here. Both these tissues are meristematic tissues. They're called the lateral meristems because they cause the stem to thicken, and there is sort of sideways growth, right? Lateral growth. Okay, within inverted commas. Now, this is the cross section of this stem, okay, of a woody tree or woody plant. So here we can see the cork cambium, and then the outer part here is the cork. Okay, then you have the cork cambium, then you have the cortex here, and then primary phylum, secondary phylum, vascular cambium, secondary xylem, and primary xylem. In this order, this is for a tree that has undergone secondary growth. Okay. So the two types of lateral meristems are vascular cambium, which is located between the phylum and the xylem tissues in the vascular bundles. And cork cambium is located under the epidermal layer, that means behind the epidermal layer. Let us now discuss secondary growth in an eudicot stem. So before secondary growth, the cross-section of the eudicot stem looks like this. It has a layer of epidermis, then cortex, primary phylum, vascular cambium, primary xylem, and pith. So these are the primary tissues that are produced during primary growth. Okay. Now, when secondary growth starts, it starts when the vascular cambium here divides by mitosis, and then it joins together. All the vascular cambium join together to form a complete cambium ring, right? Through the process of mitosis. So this is the first event that occurs in secondary growth in the stem. Formation of cambium ring. Right, let's go to the second stage of secondary growth. So the main event that occurs is that the cambium cells in the cambium ring, the red ring here, will divide by mitosis, and it divides and produce secondary xylem inwards, the green part. Okay, secondary xylem inwards, and it divides outwards to form the secondary phylum, the purple layer here. Okay. So the secondary tissues that are newer are closest to the vascular cambium, and the primary tissues will be pushed away from the vascular cambium. So primary xylem is pushed inwards, further inwards to the pith, and is compressed to form a stronger wood layer in the center, right? As the walls of the xylem, especially xylem vessels, are thickened with a strong hard substance called lignin to provide mechanical support to the plant. Whereas the primary phylum is pushed outwards towards the epidermis, okay, the light blue area. So when secondary xylem layer grows, as more and more secondary xylem is produced, it is compressed, okay, and then the circumference of the stem will increase, so the stem will become thicker, causing the epidermis on the surface of the stem to stretch and crack. All right, so this is when the cork cambium will actively divide. At this time, it will divide by mitosis. So cork cambium is this pink ring here. All right, always look out for the two rings in the stem. What's the first ring? Vascular cambium ring. And then we have the cork cambium, which forms a ring too on the outer part of the stem. Okay, so the main event is that the cork cambium actively divides by mitosis to form cork cells on the outer side here and secondary cortex on the inner side here. Okay, so what is the function of the cork layer? Now the cork layer consists of cells that are impermeable to water, it does not allow water to pass through it, and it's also made up of dead cells with a waxy substance inside called suberin on the walls of the cells. So the cork layer protects the stem from insect and pathogen attack when the epidermis has cracked and is shed. Shed means that it drops off. Okay, so epidermis is no longer doesn't function to protect the outer part of the stem, so the cork layer will take over from there. It reduces water loss too due to a waxy substance called suberin in the cork cell walls that's impermeable to water. So the main event that occurs is cork cambium actively divides by mitosis. Okay, so here's the summary of the secondary growth in eudicot stem. So we can see the increase in the diameter of the stem as secondary tissues are produced here, right? So basically the first event that occurs is that the vascular cambium divides through mitosis and joins together to form the cambium ring, a complete cambium ring. And then after that, the cambium cells in the cambium ring will divide inwards to form the secondary xylem, the green layer, and outwards to form the secondary phylum. Okay, and then lastly, the cork cambium, which is the second ring on the outer part of the stem, divides by mitosis to form cork on the outer side, the orange layer, and secondary cortex on the inner side. And then the function of cork is to protect the stem from insect and pathogen attack and to reduce water loss from the stem. Now this diagram, which is also found in the textbook, shows us the cell divisions in the vascular cambium and cork cambium during secondary growth in the eudicot stem. So in the first year, there's primary growth, and we see the primary tissues formed here are the epidermis, cortex, the white layers, the cortex, primary phylum, vascular cambium, and primary xylem, right? But here we can see that there is already a ring of vascular cambium, the cambium ring. So maybe secondary growth has already started, okay, just started. So in the second year, we see the vascular cambium has produced the secondary phylum on the outside and the secondary xylem on its inner side, okay? So remember that the secondary tissues are always closest to the vascular cambium that produces the secondary tissues later, okay, in the plant's growth. So what about the primary tissues? Now the primary phylum will be pushed outwards towards the epidermis, and the primary xylem will be pushed inwards towards the pith here. All right, and then the epidermis will be shed, it will crack, stretch and crack, and then it will drop off. Okay, now the cork cambium starts to become active and to divide by mitosis, to carry out cell division by mitosis. So let's look at the third year now. Okay, so here we can see the cork cambium has already started producing the gray layer. Here is the cork, right? And also produces secondary cortex on the inner side. Now in the third year of growth, the layer of secondary xylem has thickened. Okay, more and more secondary xylem is produced by the vascular cambium here. Okay, so this will increase the diameter of the stem, and also secondary phylum. More secondary phylum will be produced here. Okay, and then this is the cork cambium, and then the cork is here. Right, let's answer these two questions which are usually asked by students. What is cork? Cork is a tissue made up of dead impermeable cork cells. So they have thick walls containing a substance called suberin, a waxy substance that makes the cork waterproof. Okay, so the cork cells are impermeable because of this suberin. And what's impermeable? It means that these cells do not allow liquids and also gases to pass through them. Okay, so because of that, the cork is waterproof. All right, you can see the cork sometimes. If you look at the stoppers of certain bottles, all right, it's used to stopper bottles, all right, to prevent the leakage of water from the bottle, all right, because the cork is waterproof. Now, so what's the use of this cork layer? It is a protective layer on the surface of the woody stem and root to reduce water loss from the stem, protects the inner tissues from injury and insect and pathogen attacks. Okay, so it's very important to have the cork, especially on trees. If not, they may have a lot of water loss, and they may be attacked by insects that can penetrate into the softer tissues, right? Use their mouthparts to penetrate the softer tissues. Right, so the cork is produced by cork cambium. All right, and you can see here, the cork is underneath this dark layer, which we sometimes call the bark. Okay, so the cork is one of the first layers under the surface of the stem. This is the cork. So what is bark? Is bark the same as cork? Not exactly. Bark includes more than cork. It includes cork and other tissues also. Okay, so all the tissues present outside the vascular cambium in the stem is collectively called the bark. Okay, so now you see this is a vascular cambium, and this is a stem that has undergone secondary growth. So this is the vascular cambium, the red line. So all the tissues from outside this vascular cambium right to the surface of the stem, all these are included in bark. Okay, so it is formed during secondary growth in the eudicote stem, and it includes, first of all, the periderm. Periderm is a collective term for cork, cambium, and cortex. Okay, but textbook just puts periderm includes cork and cambium. So I suppose that is enough if you mention these two as part of periderm. Now, then other than the periderm, okay, these three tissues, the bark also includes the secondary phylum. Okay, that means primary phylum, secondary phylum here, especially that is living and can transport organic food substances. All right. So have you heard of the bark ringing experiment, whereby a layer of bark is taken away from the tree? Okay, if you peel off the bark from the tree, like the bark here, you peel it off from the tree, it will also take away it will also remove the secondary phylum that are living cells that can transport organic food substances. So this is very dangerous for the tree, especially if a complete ring of bark is removed from the tree stem. What will happen to the tree? The tree will lack secondary phylum to transport organic food substances to the roots, down to the roots, from the leaves to the roots. And then the roots will die first. Then when the roots die, the plant cannot absorb any more water, cannot transport the water up to the leaves. So the whole plant will die there. Okay, so if we remove a complete ring of bark from a tree, it will cause the tree to die, right? Okay, we'll talk more about the bark ringing experiment in another topic. Now here you can see the layers of the tree stem. There's the heartwood right in the center, and then the sapwood. Okay, never mind about all these terms, heart and sapwood. But here is the vascular cambium, all right? And then all the tissues external to the vascular cambium, including the living phylum, cork, cambium, cork, and also the secondary cortex. After the living phylum, there's a secondary cortex. Then cork, cambium, and cork. All these are called bark collectively, right? And then periderm includes the cork and the cork cambium. Okay, so we have learned three terms here: cork, bark, and periderm. Now let's discuss secondary growth in an eudicote root. So the roots of certain plants also undergo secondary growth in order to increase the circumference of the root. Okay, as seen here in this tree, the roots are also thickened and they undergo secondary growth. So the secondary growth process in an eudicote root is very similar to the secondary growth in an eudicote stem, as we have discussed just now, right? So here we see the root before secondary growth, and after that the root will thicken during secondary growth, and its diameter will increase. Its circumference will also increase. Okay, so let's find out more about the process of secondary growth in an eudicote root. Now, so this is the root, the cross-section of an eudicote root before secondary growth. So this root has only undergone primary growth. All right, so it consists of the epidermis, cortex, and then it has an endodermis, okay, that protects the inner parts. And then we have the xylem, like a star-shaped structure in the center of the root. Okay, now this can be seen also if you cut a carrot root, you can see this xylem in the center. All right, so I will be doing a shorts video on the carrot root later on to show you the cross section. Okay, the real carrot root. Now, so after the endodermis, we have the primary xylem, and the phylum tissue alternates with the arms of the xylem here. So phylum, xylem, and so forth. Then where is the vascular cambium? The vascular cambium is right at the edge of the primary xylem. Okay, so it's going to start dividing actively, and then that will start the secondary growth process, right? So this is before secondary growth. Okay, here we see the vascular cambium, the blue lines, it represents the vascular cambium before secondary growth. Now, stage 1 of secondary growth in the root. The vascular cambium divides by mitosis and combine to form a complete cambium ring. Okay, so before that the cambium was around here, but it did not combine and join together here, right? So now there is a mitosis in the vascular cambium, and it combines to form a complete cambium ring, just like for the stem. Okay, but in this case the cambium is all joined together in the form of a star-shaped structure first. Now, stage 2, the cells in the cambium ring divide inwards to form the secondary xylem, the pink structure. Okay, the pink parts. So this is the secondary xylem, and the primary xylem is in the center, still in the center. It will stay in the center. Secondary xylem is outside the primary xylem. Okay, and then next is the cambium that produces the secondary xylem. But the cambium ring also divides outwards to form the new phylum, which is secondary phylum. All right, so this light blue part is secondary phylum. So what happens to the primary phylum? It will get pushed out. Okay, the root will become thicker due to the activity of the vascular cambium. Okay, due to the formation of secondary xylem. Okay, especially secondary xylem, and also, of course, there's also secondary phylum. The stage 3 now. So it's quite similar to the stem, secondary growth in the stem. Now, in stage 3, as in the stem, the cork cambium starts to get active. It's located just under the epidermis, so it will divide actively to form the cork cells, the brown layer here. All right, that forms a protective layer on the root. And it will also form secondary cortex here, which is not clearly shown here, which is not shown here. All right, so the secondary cortex will also sort of be together with the original cortex. Now, what is the function of cork? Cork cells provide protection to the root tissues to reduce water loss and prevent attacks by pathogens and insects. Same as for the stem. So there are many eudicots that carry out secondary growth. But how about monocots? Do monocots carry out secondary growth? So most monocots do not undergo secondary growth, but there are a small number of monocots that do undergo secondary growth. So you have to know these monocots species. So the first one is Dracaena species. Now the spelling should be C-A-E, not C-E-A. So the Dracaena species is this plant, okay? And it has a hard stem, almost like a woody stem, but the process of secondary growth may be different from that in the eudicot plants. Okay, now this is a monocot. You can see the leaves have parallel veins here. Okay, and then we have aloe vera or aloe species. They have a thickened stem at the bottom here, especially when they grow older. It will thicken. The stem will thicken. Okay, so it also experiences secondary growth, and so does agave species. All right. So this plant is a plant that grows in dry conditions. Okay. So remember these three names: Dracaena, aloe, Dracaena species, aloe species, and agave species. Right. So we finished discussing secondary growth in the eudicot stem and roots. Right. Now let's continue with the necessity or importance of secondary growth. Firstly, secondary growth, which is the process whereby the stem and root diameter is thickened, is increased. It provides stability to the plants by increasing the stem and root diameters to suit the height of plants. Okay, because the plant is growing taller and taller. So for big plants like trees, they need to increase the stem and root diameter so that they are more stable and they won't topple over, or the stem will not break. Okay, So it provides not only stability but mechanical support, more mechanical support to the plants as the stem and roots thicken through the production of the tissue called secondary xylem, which is actually wood. All right. So a tall tree can be well supported by the stem, the thick stem that is formed, that is thickened through secondary growth. Now, apart from that, apart from stability and mechanical support, secondary growth also produces more xylem tissues, especially the secondary xylem tissues, to transport more water and mineral salts as the needs of the plant increases. As the plant grows, it will need more water and mineral salts, so you need more xylem tissues to transport the water and mineral salts. And also more phylum tissues. It produces more phylum tissues, which are the secondary phylum, to transport more organic food substances for the growing plant. Now, also the new xylem and phylum tissues, the secondary tissues here, are always continuously produced to replace the old and damaged tissues that are no longer functional. Now, apart from that, the cork cambium produces the cork, right? In the end, we get stronger and thicker bark to protect the plants from excessive water loss, physical injuries, and pathogen infections. Okay, so remember the function of the bark, right? And it allows the plants to live longer because when it has all these tissues and the support is able to live longer unless it is cut down, okay, by man, or it is burnt through forest fires and all that, right? So it allows plants to live longer to increase the chances of seed production, all right, because the plant lives, if the plant lives longer, it can produce more seeds, and so it can increase the reproduction rate of the plant, okay, and it can produce more offspring for the continuation of the species. So let's look at a comparison between primary growth and secondary growth in eudicots. Can be asked as a structured or essay question. Now, when you're asked to compare, you have to state the similarities and differences. So state a few similarities, okay? So both types of growth, primary growth and secondary growth, can increase the size of the plants permanently, all right? For example, primary growth increases the height of the plant and the length of the roots, right? But secondary growth increases the diameter of the stem. Okay, both growths occur in woody plants, such as the trees, woody trees. Both growths involve cell division by mitosis in the meristems, right? So, but the type of meristems that are involved are different, okay, for primary and secondary growth. So now let's go on to the differences. Primary growth involves the apical meristem at the shoot tips and root tips. But for secondary growth, it is caused by the lateral meristem, the activity of the lateral meristem, that is the vascular cambium and cork cambium that carries out cell division, right? Now, parts of the plant that undergo this growth. So primary growth occurs on the stems and roots in the younger regions of the plant, okay, when the plant is still young. But secondary growth occurs when the primary growth has ceased, has stopped on the matured stems and roots. Then these matured stems and roots will undergo secondary growth, okay? But does primary growth still occur in the plant? Yes, if the plant is still growing taller and has young shoots that grow longer and the root grows longer, there's still secondary, there's still primary growth, but it's occurring in a different part of the plant, maybe not on the matured stems and roots. So primary growth and secondary growth can occur simultaneously, that means on the same tree, but in different locations. Now, direction of growth. Primary growth occurs longitudinally, all right, that means lengthwise. Okay, the stem and the roots will elongate, but the secondary growth occurs radially, meaning that the stem will grow in diameter, in circumference. Okay, right. Growth effects. Primary growth increases the length of stems and roots of a plant, but secondary growth increases the thickness, diameter, or circumference of stems and roots of the plant, right? Right, tissues and structures form. In primary growth, the epidermis, cortex, and primary vascular tissues such as primary xylem and phylum are formed. But in secondary growth, the secondary tissues are formed. So bark is formed, the periderm, which consists of cork cambium and cork tissues, are formed. Okay, bark consists of the periderm plus the living phylum, right? Now, lenticels, they are pores on the stem or for gaseous exchange. Okay, that means involving the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Okay, so for example, in respiration, oxygen will have to diffuse into the plant stem through the lenticels. Secondary vascular tissues are also produced during secondary growth. These are the secondary xylem and secondary phloem that transport substances in the plant. Okay, so secondary xylem will transport water and mineral salts, and secondary phloem will transport organic food substances. Now, presence of woody tissues. So in primary growth, there are no woody tissues formed. But in secondary growth will produce woody tissues, which are actually the secondary xylem that consists of xylem vessels, tracheids, and sclerenchyma. So all these cells have lignified cell walls. That means the cell walls contain lignin, which is a hard and strong substance that can help to give support to the plant. Now, thickness of the bark. In primary growth, the bark is thin or is absent. And in secondary growth, the bark is thick. So most of the time, there's no bark, okay, formed in primary growth. Now, presence of annual rings. So in primary growth, there's the absence of annual rings, annual growth rings. And in secondary growth, if we cut the cross-section of the stem of a tree, we can see concentric rings on the wood, and these are the annual growth rings, okay, in the plant stem. Now let's discuss annual growth rings, which are found in the stems of trees that have undergone secondary growth, right? So what's an annual ring? It is a layer of wood formed during 1 year of a plant's growth, okay? So just take one concentric ring here, just one ring. That is one annual ring, okay? It is observed as one of many concentric rings in a card stem, okay? So all these concentric rings, they have the same center here, right now, right? And they are actually layers of wood or secondary xylem that's formed during secondary growth, okay? So an annual ring is caused by cell division of vascular cambium, not cork cambium, vascular cambium, which produces the secondary xylem of wood, and that forms annual rings. Year by year, it forms annual rings. Okay, 1 year, one annual ring. Let's find out more about the annual rings. Right, so annual growth rings. Now, in temperate countries, there are 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter. Okay, this is unlike Malaysia, where we have a tropical climate and there are no 4 seasons. Okay, there are no seasons here, right? And the climate is more or less consistent throughout the year. Now, the age of plants living in the temperate climate can be determined based on the number of annual growth rings in the stem. All right. So if we cut down a tree and we look at the stem, you'll see many rings. We may see many rings, and by counting the number of rings, we can know the age of the plant. All right, because one ring represents 1 year of growth. So this is due to the fact that secondary growth happens at different rates according to the seasons, and it will produce the light wood and the dark wood. Okay, light wood actually consists of xylem vessels that are bigger but with thinner walls, and dark wood, and okay, light wood occurs in spring, and in summer there's the production of dark wood instead. All right, where the xylem vessels produced are smaller with smaller lumen and thicker walls, because the growth rate is slower in late summer due to the fact that there's less water and lower light intensity. So let's find out more in a systematic way how to explain these annual rings, Okay, so here's the summary of everything that we have discussed just now. Annual growth rings. The age of plants living in a temperate climate can be determined based on the number of growth rings, annual growth rings in the stem. The reason is that secondary growth happens at different rates during the season. So during spring, okay, remember, we are asked to explain annual growth rings. During spring, larger, thinner walled xylem vessels are formed. Why? Because there's enough water supply and sunlight, so there's faster growth. So the secondary xylem formed is bigger. The secondary xylem vessels formed are bigger, and they have empty lumen here to transport water, right? They don't have cytoplasm. But the xylem wall is thinner. Okay, so when you look from afar, we can't see the xylem vessels, but overall, collectively, we see the wood form is brighter or lighter in color. So this produces light wood. Okay, so take note that the climatic conditions affect the rate of growth of the secondary xylem. So it will affect the structure of the xylem vessels, and then that will affect the color of the wood. Okay, now in late summer and then autumn and winter, there's less water supply already, and the sunlight, the light intensity is lowered. Okay, and the temperatures are also reduced. So there's slower growth, and the wood that's formed is darker. Why? Because the secondary xylem vessels that are formed are smaller and have thicker walls. Okay, and the lumen is smaller. So when they are grouped together, they will produce darker colored wood. So we call that dark wood, right? So in spring, we have the light wood, as seen in this picture here, the light brown color. And in late summer to autumn and winter, we have the dark wood here. Okay? So spring, summer, autumn, winter, this makes up 1 year. So the growth of this plant from here to here forms one ring, right? It's an annual ring, and it is equivalent to 1 year's growth. Okay? So you can calculate the number of rings to know how old the tree is. Of course, you have to chop the tree down and see the stem, then you will know how old it is. So here's the summary of what we studied just now for annual growth rings. In spring until early summer, there is more water, more sunlight, so higher growth rate of the xylem tissues, the secondary xylem tissues. This will produce bigger xylem vessels with thinner walls, so it produces wood that is brighter and lighter in color, the light wood. But in late summer till autumn and then winter, there's less water and less sunlight. So there's a lower growth rate for the secondary xylem tissues, and smaller xylem vessels are produced with thicker walls, so this will produce the dark wood here. Okay, so one light wood ring and one dark wood ring is equivalent to an annual growth rate. Now here's an extra fact. So the width of the ring can vary for different years. Sometimes the width of the ring is wider, sometimes it's narrower. So again, one of the factors that affect the width of the ring is are the climatic conditions. During rainy season, when there's a lot of water, there's a higher growth rate. And so more secondary xylem is produced. The quantity is more, okay? Not just the type of xylem vessels, but the quantity is more, and more of it is produced. So that's why the ring is wider. But in certain seasons, it's drier for certain seasons and for different years. It may be dry, so there's a lower growth rate and less secondary xylem is produced, so the ring is narrow. Okay, so this is a narrow ring, but this is a broad ring, a wider ring. But we concentrate more on the quality of the xylem vessels, the type of xylem vessels produced. Okay, as in the top part here. This is just an extra question for an extra question. So here's a question on the ring, annual rings. Diagram 2.2 shows a cross-section of a tree taken from a temperate area, right? So based on this diagram 2.2, estimate the age of the tree. So pause the video for a moment and try to estimate the age of the tree based on the annual rings. All right, what's the answer? Yes, it's 10 years. Let's see how we count. The first part, the center part with the black ring here, this is the first year, okay? Then year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 years old, okay? Now, describe the formation of its annual rings. Firstly, we mentioned that secondary growth has occurred, but it occurs at different rates according to the different seasons. The secondary xylem produced in spring to early summer is larger, and it has thinner, not thicker, thinner walls, right? So you produce a brighter colored wood or lighter colored wood due to sufficient sunlight and water supply. Whereas The secondary xylem formed in late summer, autumn, and winter. In winter, there's usually no growth, but late summer and autumn are smaller and it has thicker walls, so it is darker. Okay, it looks darker due to the climatic conditions of less light and less water supply. Okay, so here we can see the explanation. Growth in spring produces the light wood because the growth rate is faster, xylem vessels are bigger, and growth in late summer and autumn and produces the darker wood because the growth rate is slower. Okay. Finally, let's finish up with the economic importance or uses of plants that have undergone secondary growth. So plants that have undergone secondary growth, like the big trees, have high economic values because they can produce timber, such as Shorea species, Meranti, and Belanocarpus, or a species or chenga, right? So these are teak. They can produce teak, which is a type of wood that's hard and long-lasting, right? Unless they are eaten by white ants. Now, plants that undergo secondary growth have strong and hard woods that are suitable for building houseboats, furniture, fences, doors, and others. Okay, so you can see wooden chairs and tables, all right, or cupboards are made from wood. Now, the presence of anole rings make the furniture look attractive. Okay, anole rings are the circular rings in the wood, and they can be made into decorative items. Then the wood and the bark, okay, for example, in this picture, of some plants, such as Hopia species, Merawan and Meranti, can produce resin, okay, like the substance here, which is a sticky substance, and oil. So these substances can be commercialized. That means they can be used to make commercial products like varnish, adhesive substance, perfume, or even medicine. Okay, and then some perfume can be obtained from the flowers of these plants, right? The perfume, the substance that is used to produce perfume can come from the flowers of woody plants also. Okay, now flowering plants can be made into decorative plants too, right? And commercialized fruits, okay, such as mangoes and mangosteens. That means all these fruits that can be exported for sale, right? Or eaten, that can be sold and eaten. So mangoes, mangosteens, even durians, okay, are products of plants that have undergone secondary growth, and they're able to generate income as well as boost economic growth. Right, that's all for this lesson. Thanks for watching, and do share, like, and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye for now.